What if the most effective way to manage stress is to stop managing it? Sounds like a lazy advice, but that's exactly what a text written 24 centuries ago says. 81 short chapters, one of the most translated texts in human history, second only to the Bible. It has only two main ideas. First, the world works like water. Water never fights, and yet it carves stone. Second, the harder you push, the harder you get pushed back. And here's what's uncomfortable. Modern neuroscience and stress psychology have been arriving at the same conclusion for the last 30 years. This video is about how ancient Eastern thought and lab experiments ended up at the same point, and what to do with that on a regular Tuesday. For most of the 20th century, Western culture was dominated by one model of stress. A simple model. Stress is the enemy. An enemy you have to defeat. With willpower. With discipline. With extra effort. If you're tired, push through. If you're scared, break through the fear. If it's not working, try harder. This model soaked into everything. Corporate culture, school, sports, productivity books, morning training programs. The image of the successful 20th century person was someone who overcomes, someone who doesn't give up, someone who succeeds through resistance. And there's truth in that. Many big things in life really do require effort. Without discipline, you won't have health, mastery, or large projects. That's normal. But this model has a blind spot. It works on short distances and breaks on long ones. If you got through a hard exam on 2 sleepless nights, yes, willpower helped. If you live like that for 10 years, that's not willpower. That's chronic exhaustion. And this is where modern stress research starts saying something very inconvenient. Not stress is bad, but trying to handle stress with discipline alone is bad. One of the most cited researchers in this field formulated the idea of allostatic load. Roughly, it's the price the body pays for prolonged tension. When the system reacts to a threat, cortisol gets released, the heart rate accelerates, blood pressure rises. That's a normal response to a specific danger. The problem comes when the response doesn't shut off. When the body lives in constant readiness for a threat that isn't there. What happens next has been studied in detail. Chronically elevated cortisol damages the hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for memory and learning. It narrows blood vessels. It weakens immunity. It disrupts sleep. It shifts appetite. It worsens decision-making. The very system that's supposed to save us, on a long timeline, becomes the thing that wears us down. This creates an unpleasant paradox. The harder a person pushes themselves to handle pressure, the more pressure builds up. The tighter they squeeze to endure, the denser the thing they have to endure becomes. It's like being in water and trying to claw your way out by flailing. The harder you flail, the faster you sink. Any swimming instructor will tell you the same thing. Relax. The body floats by itself. And this is where it gets interesting. Because that phrase, relax and it floats by itself, we know as a basic swimming instructor cliché. But in one ancient text, it's written as a fundamental law of how reality works. And around that idea, an entire philosophical system was built 2,500 years ago. The Tao Te Ching is a compact text. 81 chapters, around 5,000 Chinese characters. In length, it's shorter than a small novel. Archaeological findings show that in the form we read it now, the text settled around the 4th or 3rd century before the Common Era. Authorship is attributed to a semi-legendary teacher named Lao Tzu, literally the Old Master. Modern scholarship agrees the text is a composite gathered over generations. Inside this text, there's one central idea that's notoriously hard to translate. In Chinese, it sounds like wu wei, literally non-action, but translating it as doing nothing breaks the meaning immediately. Much closer in spirit, effective action without effort, or even shorter, action without resistance. One professor of philosophy and cognitive science, who has spent 20 years analyzing this text through the lens of modern brain science, described wu wei this way. It's a state where you do something difficult, but from the inside it feels easy. You're not fighting the task. You merge with it. And that's exactly when the best result comes out. Sounds mystical, but if you look at modern psychology, this is familiar territory. It just goes by a different name. Flow. The state where a person is so absorbed in what they're doing that they lose the sense of time and of self. The programmer who codes for 5 hours and thinks 15 minutes have passed. The musician on stage who can't remember how they got to the venue. The surgeon in operation. The child in play. Research on flow has been running since the 1970s. By the 2020s, thousands of studies have accumulated. Several things are robustly confirmed. In flow, performance is higher than under conscious effort. Creativity is higher. Learning speed is higher. Subjective stress is lower. The person does harder things, longer, and more accurately, while feeling less drained. What happens in the brain at that moment? This is the most interesting part. Activity in the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for conscious control and planning, partially decreases. The phenomenon is called transient hypofrontality. To simplify, the commander steps out for a break, and the system starts running by itself, better than under the commander. This matches one of the central images in Daoist philosophy. Wu Wei is when the self stops getting in the way of the work. When the inner controller stops constantly checking whether everything is going right and lets the process carry itself. There's another piece of evidence. From a completely different field, stress psychology. In 1979, the medical school at the University of Massachusetts launched a program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. 8 weeks. Simple practices. Not fighting stress. Not suppressing thoughts. Just observing them without resistance. Acceptance. Since then, more than 22,000 people have completed the program at the original clinic alone, and millions more through adapted versions worldwide. Dozens of randomized controlled trials have accumulated. Meta-analyses, that is, summaries of many studies at once, show the same result. Reduction in anxiety symptoms. Reduction in depression symptoms. Better sleep. Reduction in chronic pain. And here's what matters. The mechanism through which this works isn't defeat stress. It's stop resisting it. Paradoxically, if you don't fight anxiety, it leaves faster. If you fight it, it grows. The same way a fire grows when you fan it. This idea, in the Tao Te Ching, is captured through the metaphor of water. And this metaphor is one of the strongest in the book. Water is the softest substance on earth. You can cut it with your finger. You can spill it. It doesn't resist any object placed into it. And yet, no substance in the world wears down stone the way water does. Not a hammer. Not a chisel. Not metal. Drop by drop, the soft defeats the hard. Not by force. By time. By persistence. By absence of resistance. The ancient text uses this as a model. If you want to do something big, be like water. Don't attack obstacles. Flow around them. Take the shape of whatever you fall into. Don't lose direction. Keep moving. Modern science finds a very specific mechanism in this image. When you resist an inner state, anxiety, fatigue, fear, you create a second layer of stress. Stress about stress. That doubles the load on the nervous system. When you accept the state as a fact, without judgment, without fighting, there is no second layer. And the first one settles faster. There's also a classic psychology experiment, the white bear effect. If you tell a person not to think about a white bear, they start thinking about a white bear far more often than if no one had said anything. Suppression works backwards. The energy you spend trying not to feel something feeds the very thing you're trying not to feel. And one more example, cross-cultural. In Japanese culture, there's a concept called ma, pause, empty space, gap. In the Western frame, emptiness is the absence of something useful. In the Japanese frame, emptiness is valuable in itself. Without the pause between notes, there's no music. Without distance between objects, there's no composition. Without rest between efforts, there's no result. This concept is a cousin of the Daoist Wu Wei. Both say that not doing is an active part of doing. So 3 independent lines, ancient Eastern philosophy, flow research, and mindfulness psychology, point in the same direction. The strongest results in work and life come not from maximum strain, but from removing extra resistance. From the inner controller going quiet. From body and mind no longer fighting what is. And this isn't a call to laziness. It's about a different kind of effort. The effort of noticing where you're slowing yourself down. Where you're adding a second layer of stress on top of the first. Where you're pushing against a situation that just needs 1 minute of waiting. Okay, the idea is clear. But how do you turn it into a daily habit? There are a few moves that repeat among people who manage to do it. First, notice the moment of resistance. This is the base skill. Without it, the rest doesn't work. Resistance is the second reaction to a situation. The first one is what is. A deadline. Anxiety. Fatigue. A hard conversation. The second is the reaction to that reaction. It shouldn't be like this. I shouldn't be feeling this. It's unfair. That second reaction creates most of the suffering. It trains simply. A few times a day, at work, in traffic, in line, ask yourself a short question. What am I fighting right now? Not what am I feeling? That's different. But specifically, what am I at war with right now? The answer is often surprising. Often, you're fighting very ordinary things. With what already happened. With what someone else feels. With the fact that time keeps moving. With something that fundamentally isn't yours to control. Then a simple question. Can this be changed right now? If yes, act. If no, release the tension. This isn't passivity. It's redistributing effort to where it actually works. Second, the water principle in a hard problem. When you face a big problem, work, personal, anything, there are two strategies. The first is the battering ram. Force your way through the obstacle. If it's small, the ram works. If it's big, the ram breaks the ram. The second strategy is flowing around. Not giving up the goal. Changing the trajectory. Asking yourself, where's the path of least resistance that leads roughly the same way? This isn't about avoiding the hard. It's about not running headfirst into walls. If a negotiation hits a dead end, sometimes it's better to leave and come back tomorrow than to push. If the code isn't writing itself, sometimes it's better to stand up and walk for 15 minutes than to clench your fists. If a conversation is heating up, sometimes it's better to say, let's come back to this in an hour. Water doesn't attack the rock. It finds a crack. Third, the morning gap. This is a concrete practice. 10 to 15 minutes in the morning, before messages are open, before tasks have started, before your head is full of plans for the day. Sit. Don't do anything. Don't meditate in any formal sense. Just sit and watch what's happening inside. What thoughts come, what sensations are in the body, what mood is in the background. This isn't rest in the usual sense. It's calibration. After this kind of gap, you enter the day not with a preloaded reaction system, but from a clean start. And the whole day runs differently. Hundreds of mindfulness studies confirm this. The effect is stable and measurable. Fourth, tell a real deadline from a fake one. A real one is when there's an actual external point you have to reach. A fake one is when you're driving yourself, because there's an inner voice saying faster, better, more. Most modern stress comes from fake deadlines. From a race you started yourself, where no one fired the starting gun. The Tao Te Ching states this idea sharply. If you run, you'll fall. If you rush, you'll miss the place you were rushing to. Modern neuropsychology confirms this very literally. In a state of rush, the prefrontal cortex is overloaded. The quality of thinking drops. A person who's hurrying objectively does worse work than someone who's working densely but without a rush. What to avoid? The most common mistake is turning this idea into a new discipline. From now on, I'll relax correctly. From now on, I'll meditate exactly 15 minutes every morning, or it doesn't count. That's willpower against stress all over again. It contradicts the idea itself. If Wu Wei becomes another item on a to-do list, it stops being Wu Wei. Better, softly. Today, 5 minutes of the morning gap worked. Good. Tomorrow it didn't work at all. Also fine. The point isn't to become a disciplined master of non-doing. The point is to slowly shift the default setting. From everything must be controlled to much of it can be released. How to tell it's working? The simplest measure is sleep. If you fall asleep slower than a month ago, or wake up at 3 in the morning with a spinning head, the default setting is still in control mode. If sleep gets deeper, and you wake up without heaviness, something is shifting. Sleep is one of the most sensitive indicators of overall system load. 3 key takeaways, briefly. First, chronic stress isn't about the number of tasks. It's about the way you approach them. When you resist, the load doubles. Second, the strongest results don't come from maximum effort. They come from removing extra resistance. This idea was formulated in one form by a text from the 4th century before the Common Era. In another form, by modern science of flow and mindfulness. Third, the main skill is noticing the moment of resistance and not adding a second layer of stress on top of the first. It trains with one short question, asked a few times a day. Concrete action for this week. Every morning, before you pick up the phone, sit for 10 minutes and just watch. Once a day, no more. Ask yourself the question, what am I fighting right now? If the answer is in the category of with something I don't control, let it go. This is one of those cases where ancient knowledge and modern neuroscience converge on the same point. The soft really does defeat the hard, in nature, in the nervous system, and in work. On this channel, methods for improving effectiveness and quality of life, grounded in data and tested by time. Subscribe if you want more breakdowns of what actually works.